Building a family can be a complicated, messy, lonely, and sometimes heartbreaking process. But you don't have to navigate this challenging journey alone.
Welcome to the AllPaths Podcast, where we support and celebrate all the different ways there are to try to grow your family. We are your hosts, Kate and Emily from the nonprofit organization AllPaths Family Building. And today we're talking with Trystan about his family and his work in this space. Trystan, thank you for joining us today.
Of course, what a delight to be with you and to see you again.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to see you. So before we get into your own family's story in more detail, we'd love for you to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Absolutely. My name is Trystan Reese. I live in Portland, Oregon. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a father of three and an advocate, an educator, an all-around nerd when it comes to transgender fertility and family building.
A nerd is a compliment in our eyes, and you're also like the most amazing nerd we know. So
That's a big compliment. So I'm going to put that on my LinkedIn profile from now on.
Yes,
The
feel
biggest
free.
nerd you know.
You can quote me.
Done.
So people might be familiar with parts of your story, but can you take us back? Where did your journey begin?
Yeah, wow, that is a big question.
Mhm.
I was raised in Southern California. I'm Canadian by birth, but raised in Southern California, a very small, very conservative town. My parents are neither small nor conservative. They're Canadian, and so they're very neutral, as many Canadians are. But I am a transgender man, and I just didn't have access to a lot of language or anything like that growing up. And so I just thought, that I was a strange kid, which I was. And then slowly, unfortunately, as I got a little bit older, I started to think maybe that there was something wrong with me. And so it was a huge relief to come to awareness that like being transgender is a thing. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not broken. I'm just transgender. And for me, that meant that I was able to transition, which not every trans person does, nor do they have to, or should they. But I did. I started taking testosterone. I sort of aligned the outside a little bit more cleanly with the inside. But throughout that process, I ended up keeping my reproductive organs. And in that way, through both adoption and biology, I was able to build a family. And so that's the very, very, very Cliff Notes version of where the story started and how things are going so far.
Amazing. Well, we're going to dig into a little bit more, get the more than the Cliff Notes version. But did you always want to be a parent?
Not at all.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
No, I never wanted to be a parent. It seemed exceedingly boring to me when I looked at my parents' lives. It seemed like a lot of work. It seemed very boring. And in fact, you can't see it, of course, because it's a podcast, but I have a big Peter Pan tattoo on my arm that I got to remind me never to grow up. And, now I feel like he's there a little bit more as a reminder of that desire, but I did not follow that advice at all. And I have officially grown up after never wanting to be a parent. It wasn't until I met the person who is now my partner that I'm married to that I ever saw myself in that sort of parental role. It just was not for me. And that's actually in alignment with a lot of the data on transgender young people, transgender adolescents, largely speaking, and just numerically speaking, do not want to become parents. It's one of the reasons why we struggle so much to get young people to preserve their fertility, much more than other young people their age who are not transgender. So it's not just like, oh yeah, what 15-year-old wants to be a parent? The answer is a lot. And when we look at the data around young people, 15-year-olds who may have to preserve their fertility because they have cancer, for example, fertility preservation because it might be impacted by some kind of medical treatment for cancer, they are way more likely to preserve their fertility than a transgender young person at that age. So that was definitely true for me. I was thinking about other things. I was focused on other things. And it's also very possible, and we don't know because there's not data, it's very possible that, transgender youth, including myself at that age, just don't really see a world where they could ever be a parent. They have never had a model of that. It doesn't, sometimes it may be because their relationship with their biological parents is a little strained. That is something we know might be true. But for whatever reason, no, I didn't want to be a parent. I didn't want to buy a house. I didn't want to do any of the grown-up things, pay bills, none of it.
Well, it's all understandable.
Even though you yourself weren't interested in parenting as a younger kid, was the concept of fertility preservation ever even brought up with you when you were medically transitioning? Was it presented like as an option in case that was something you were interested in?
Not at all. No. And even though it's my understanding, and I could be wrong on this point, but it's my understanding that when I started to transition, which was 20 years ago, I still think that medical providers were supposed to be counseling on fertility. The only counseling I got was, hey, testosterone is going to make you infertile. Sign here to show that you recognize that that is a possibility and that you're okay with it. And I signed on the dotted line. That was absolutely not true medically then. It's not true now. Testosterone does not cause sterility or anything other than temporary infertility in the same way that any other, like a hormonal birth control would. It does stop ovulation in 99.8% of cases. But I was told that testosterone would render my uterus an uninhabitable environment. That was the exact words he
Oh,
used. I still remember because it was
that's
such a
awful.
visual, and as a young person, 21, 22, who would never want to be a parent. And I would have given up much, 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 much more to be able to transition. And
Right.
that's the reality for a lot of people who are early on in their transition.
Absolutely. Well, so much of what you're talking about is resonating, and obviously, we so appreciate you sharing it. When you're dealing with all the physical and emotional challenges related to even, like you were saying, there wasn't even a language at the time to even understand what you were feeling around gender and this kind of feeling, that you were different, that you were strange, like you were saying, and unresolved with that. You're focused on that, which is challenging enough. So fertility is abstract, and especially when it's not even talked about or counseled with so many young people, that just adds to the challenge.
Not just young people,
Yeah,
anyone,
yeah, yeah.
anyone who's
Right.
early on in their
Absolutely.
transition. There
Yeah.
could be someone who's 30 who's coming out and transitioning. They should also get adequate counseling. And that's the sort of language that's
Yeah.
used is adequate
Mhm.
counseling or appropriate counseling. But that those words are doing a lot of work because
Mhm.
as a movement, we just have not yet figured out how to talk about this concept of fertility preservation with transgender people. Youth, yes, but also adults. We still see less than 5% of people utilize fertility preservation, which is, to me, it's really devastating because we see upwards of 60% of transgender adults wish they had preserved their fertility. So
Yeah.
this isn't like me trying to say everyone should have babies. No, I'm saying people regret not having done that. And to
Mhm.
me, that's a real shame. You can't go back in time. You cannot
Right.
make your eggs as healthy as they were when you were 19 ever again, as you all
Don't
know,
don't we know
Nope.
that? Yes, exactly. Well, I so appreciate your advocacy, and that's in that area, and definitely hope it improves. And it can be, again, just such a personal autonomy issue and an empowerment issue to preserve your fertility so that you have the option in the future. Of course, the kind of education and information piece of it is part of it, and then access in terms of making it affordable and have it be covered by insurance. Our advocacy in New England has been trying to have fertility preservation covered, and not just for cancer, but for any medical condition or medical treatment that could impair fertility, and certainly including gender affirming care. So we're getting there, but it's definitely been, it's a process. Massachusetts finally did pass an inclusive fertility preservation law last year, which was great, but we're staying on top of the implementation of it. And then other states, we haven't been successful yet. So we're trying to do our part over here in New England.
Thank you. And not just the implementation, but to me also then the research. So like what I haven't
Hmm.
seen is there increased utilization in states where it is covered? In which case, great, that's a replicable model. That's what we can do. We can take that, we can go to other states and be like, here's how we can close that gap between regret and actual like utilization. And so that's the thing that I'm most curious about is the advocacy work is so important. And did it make a difference? You know,
Yeah,
and so
I
that's
love
that's
that.
the piece where I'm like actively shopping for researchers who are looking at doing that work so I can be a part of that process.
That would be amazing. And if we can help in any way in our states, we would be glad to, of course. So I also want to pick up on that language around your uterus being inhospitable. That ended up, of course, not being the case. Can you talk to us about that, and also about you chose to be quite public about your pregnancy, and can you talk about the journey of that?
Yeah, so this speaks so much. I work with a lot of reproductive endocrinologists, a lot of fertility clinics and centers around the world, and they're like, we don't understand, like, why do trans people not trust medical providers? This is a huge issue. Transgender people who give birth are more than 10 times more likely to give birth in an out of hospital setting, either an attempted home birth or an attempted birth in a freestanding birth clinic or center. And I think this speaks to why, is because I learned in year one of my transition that what my doctor was saying was not in alignment with what I was seeing in the community. So even year one of me transitioning, I went to a transgender man conference back when we used to have those. That's how old I am. We don't have those anymore. But I went to an F to M, a female to male trans conference in Seattle, and there was a workshop on fertility. And in fact, the man who ran it is now a good friend of mine, Matt Rice. The workshop the conference organizers thought that there would be no interest in a session on fertility. And this is like 2002 or three, right? And so they would not let Matt present at the formal conference. So he went to Kinko's and made copies of a flyer saying, come to room 244 on Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. if you want to learn about trans fertility. And he just DIY'd it. And we packed into his room. I mean, the guys are sitting on each other's laps. We're on the bed, we're on the floor, we're spilling out into the hallway. There was huge interest and curiosity about this topic, even if the conference organizers weren't aware of it. And he walked us through how he went through a pregnancy process himself. He stopped taking testosterone. They actually had a few friends be donors because they were concerned about any one person coming back and claiming rights to the child. And so they had a few people contribute, sperm donations for a conception process. They did at-home insemination. He became pregnant. He carried the pregnancy to term, and he gave birth to his son, who's now 23 years old, 24 years old. And he's just DIYing this workshop because there was no medical literature, there were no providers who would work with trans folks in this way. And I learned right then and there, oh, well, obviously a trans uterus is not an uninhabitable environment. And it kind of planted that seed for a level of skepticism that I think for me is healthy because I do this work a lot, because my father was actually an endocrinologist. He's retired now. I have a pretty healthy working relationship with formal medical systems. And I also understand the very real skepticism and judgment and fear that trans people have because the data often lags 10 to 20 years behind where we as a community, what we are seeing. And so I understand that. And we're also told a lot of things that, quite frankly, are not evidence-based by providers who are supposed to be completely evidence-based. And so that's where that skepticism can come in. And that's where the real reliance on informal or traditional or, Eastern or alternative or complementary medical systems might come into play, is because doctors have told us things that aren't true, so why should we believe them? That can kind of be a little bit of the wisdom. So after having seen anecdotally years of people that I was very close to going off of their hormones, regaining an ovulatory cycle, conceiving, successful pregnancies, giving birth to, happy children and building their families that way, I knew it was true because I'd seen it happen. I knew it was possible. Um, and so when it came time for, me to explore, is this something that I could do that I felt was, healthy enough? I'm pretty risk averse in terms of my own health. So I wanted to dig into the literature. And by the time I was ready to go through that process, 15 years after my friend Matt had gone through it, there was quite a bit of medical evidence to talk about the best practices for protocol around going off of testosterone, things like that. And I was able to dig into the literature and figure out how I could do this in as safe a way as possible for me, for my family, and for any potential future baby that might come into the picture.
And at that point, did you feel like you were able to find a care team that was evidence based and was supportive of what you were trying to do? Or were you still relying really heavily on kind of that community support, the community information resources?
Honestly, it was both. So I was able to find a care team that was really excited to provide care for me and also didn't have a ton of training. And that ended up being okay because medically speaking, there's nothing special or different about transgender pregnancies. Every study that's ever been done, including peer-reviewed published studies from very reputable organizations, research institutions, all of them say there's nothing special or different. A uterus is a uterus, fallopian tubes are fallopian tubes, eggs are eggs, pregnancy is a pregnancy. Does that mean that we won't have any other fertility or pregnancy complications? Of course not. We're still just as likely to have PCOS or fibroids or blocked tubes or anything else that might happen. But the real difference between our pregnancies and everyone else's is a little bit more of the trauma-informed care, a little bit more of the social aspects of it, a little bit more of, a provider doesn't need to go to a special training to know how to medically support our pregnancies, but they do need to know what to do if they mess up on our pronouns, how to train their team internally to make sure that they're not saying like, how's mommy doing today? Or whatever they might normally say to a patient, which I'm not a woman. I don't know how that would feel for a woman, but that would creep me out.
Please don't say that.
Please don't say that. The like mama's language online is like so interesting and fascinating and very strange for me as a non-mama, but also just as a human being. I don't know. So there are trainings around like the most effective and appropriate ways to communicate with, to build trust, that rapport building. That's all there, and that's stuff that I, now teach to medical centers and clinics. But medically speaking, you don't need to do anything special. It's more of the social and the patient relationship piece that needs to be tended to. So it was both. I did a lot of educating of them, which I'm fine with, and I hope no other trans person ever has to do because no trans person should have to do that. And then I'm just really lucky. I worked with Kaiser here in Oregon, and the team that I worked with was really humble, really open, really curious, and did a really great job supporting me and my partner.
That's so great. But also, I know we're going to talk about this more, but I think you've been obviously such a leader in the training and consultation in this area. And it started, I think, with what you were doing to kind of advise and educate your own team and the people around you. And now, but obviously now it's grown to such a wider audience, which is so great, such a gift. What was the experience for you of being pregnant, like emotionally, physically? I just imagine it's such a complex time for any individual, but when you also have transitioned your gender identity and, what was that like for you? And can you talk a little bit about being out there in terms of being on the cover of a major magazine as a pregnant person, which I am so grateful for to this day. It's such a beautiful cover, in my opinion. And could you talk about that?
I mean, I'll start with the data. There is a perception that, a transgender person going through a pregnancy experience is universally going to experience a high level of what we in the community call dysphoria, or like that deep and profound and at times debilitating discomfort with a physical process and how it aligns or does it with one's gender identity. It's actually not true, though, that universally trans pregnant people will have, a worsening or more complex relationship with our bodies and our genders and that interplay. Only about a third of transgender people who go through a pregnancy process do experience really profound or worsened discomfort with our bodies. About a third feel pretty neutral about the experience, and about a third actually find that whatever discomfort they had with their bodies before the pregnancy process, it might actually get better or go away completely during a pregnancy. And I loved seeing this when I saw this study because I was like, ooh, this is so fascinating. I like anything that proves me wrong. I love being proven wrong because it's a chance to learn and grow. And so the idea that, when you dig into the raw data of this particular study, people will say things like, I always felt ambivalent or negatively about a body with a uterus or with breast tissue. And now look what I can do. Look what this body that I used to feel really uncomfortable about or conflicted about, look what it can do. It can grow a human. And like, if I had been born the way I wish I had been born, I never would have been able to do this and have this relationship or go through this experience. So I think that that is, I don't know, I just think that that's really cool to see in the data, and that, a third of all trans people who go through this experience get to have that at least temporal time, that period of time where they're able to feel really excited about this thing about them that's been different. But I was in that middle category. I didn't experience a lot of gender dysphoria previously. I had a pretty high level of acceptance that, like, yeah, I mean, this is the body I've got. I can't do much about that. And throughout my pregnancy, it was similar. I was just sort of like, oh, this is like a cool, weird science thing that my body can do, is to grow another person. I didn't see it as particularly, beautiful or spiritual necessarily, nor did I, hate every part of the process. The third trimester we can talk about later. But mostly it was neutral. It was just like, cool, weird. What's happening this week? And that just is what it felt like, as sort of like I was my own surrogate, or like I was the test tube that my baby was growing in, is sort of how it felt. And yeah, it was really cool and profound. I would never do it again. And I'm certainly glad that I did it for the experience and to be able to grow our family and continue to build this little empire of love that we have created. Oh, I didn't say, what was it like to share the story?
Go ahead.
Well, we were already parenting. My partner and I adopted his niece and nephew when they were 1 and 3. And so we were growing our family and not building our family. We were already parenting. But as we were thinking about adding another child, and as I was considering trans pregnancy myself, you have to imagine this is 8 years ago, 9 years ago. It was a time of great excitement. I thought we were on the precipice of having our first woman president with Hillary Clinton. That's where we were, socially, politically, culturally. It felt to us, to me, that we were at this time of great possibility, and that there was going to be a little bit a continued shift towards acceptance. And my hope was at the time that sharing a positive trans story that wasn't about us trying to steal sports teams positions from, non-transgender women, or that something, negative or violent had happened to us. I really thought this is a chance to tell a different kind of story. And, Emily, to get back to your previous question about, the doctor telling me that I wouldn't ever be able to have kids, and like, what do you do with that? This is part of what I wanted to do with that. I wanted other transgender people who maybe were still being told that having a family wouldn't be for them, that they could see our story, they could see my story and think, oh, there are more possibilities for my life than I could have ever imagined. And so, my partner was very reluctant, but because he was worried about my safety, but he said, if this is something that you want to do, I understand and I support you fully. What do you need? And so I quietly ventured out into telling my story publicly by partnering with a really amazing podcast that I just loved at the time. And that was the first interview and only interview I intended to give. But when the episode dropped literally overnight, even though I didn't think it had that many people listening to it. It didn't matter. The story ended up being, just like so compelling for so many people. A pregnant man ended up being so compelling that my story really blew up online. And again, it was so surprising to me because hundreds, maybe thousands of transgender men all over the world have been giving birth for over 20 years. Like, I see them at Pride, I see them in my neighborhood, they DM me on social media, I see them on Facebook. This is not a big deal in the trans community, but outside of this little bubble that I didn't realize was so isolated, it was a really big deal. And so it was quite surreal and strange and scary to wake up in the morning while the UK tabloids had been doing their thing overnight, to see that I was splashed all over the front page of everything. while I was literally asleep.
Yeah. Well, that I didn't realize that, but it does make sense. And that must have been very alarming, especially because of still so much uncertainty, politically, socially, in so many ways. But I do appreciate the grace with which you were willing to share. Hopefully, you were able to take a little bit more control over some of the coverage. The UK tabloids probably were like a train going down the track that you couldn't stop. But some of the other things, were you able to have a little bit more editorial control over, I hope?
Absolutely. I mean, almost 100%. And
Oh,
what I
good.
did, I very quickly uh, connected with a good friend of mine runs the trans messaging project at GLAD. And luckily, we've known each other for years, and Get GLAD used to stand for the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, and now it's just GLAD. But they're the media watchdog for the LGBTQ plus community. They proactively partner with storytellers, TV shows, movies, plays who want to tell LGBTQ plus characters and storylines responsibly, respectfully, in a nuanced way, And then they also reactively will approach projects where they have reason to believe that characters are going to be told through a stereotypical lens. And Nick, bless his heart, was willing to partner with me. And I just was like, what do I do? And so he's like, let's get on Zoom. I'll walk you through it. And I really said, like, help me understand what are the stereotypes or bias or myths that the average reader of Cosmo magazine might have, the average reader of the Washington Post, People magazine, the New York Times. What might they be coming in with that I can dispel? How can I use this story as a real education piece to speak through the media instead of to the media? And then what are the intersectional issues that exist in the trans community that I can speak to while I have this platform, which most transgender people never get, so that I can also make sure that I'm continuing to elevate my community, not just for trans parents, not just for white transgender men like myself, but for non-binary people, for trans people of color, for transgender women. What can I do? What can I weave in? And he's the one who taught me, like, you can put stipulations on an interview. They can't pay you for an interview if they're reputable, but you can say, I am asking you to include that I am not on testosterone, that I'm not the first person who's been through this experience, that I have a medical
Mhm.
team. You can require them to turn off comments when they share this story on social
Mhm.
media. Like, you can
Mm.
absolutely say, here's what needs to be in place if you want an interview with me. And they can either say yes or no. And some entities were like, oh, well, we won't turn off comments. Okay, well, I won't give you an interview because I
Mhm.
refuse to have my story become fodder for the flames of transphobia. The whole
Yeah.
point is trans people can go and they can see it and they can feel really good and excited about the possibilities for their future and not see a slew of really heinous comments. If you can't turn off commenting or moderate comments, that's the other option. And I connected
Mhm.
with an online tool that helped media entities do that using AI over,
Mhm.
24/7 while everyone else is asleep. They can moderate comments. But yeah, I was able to put stipulations on, and then I worked with any media outlet who was reputable and who was willing to play by those rules to make sure that they were addressing some of those common myths and stereotypes. And yeah, I partnered with, CNN and all the big ones. And like the CBS morning show flew to Portland with their entire team and they were like in our living room. It was fascinating and weird. Yeah, and I still am not sure, was it a net positive for myself and also I think for the world, because I just was so naive going in terms of I thought people were going to be really excited and think this was super cool. And some people did, but like also some people didn't.
I know. Well, we think it's so cool. And I mean, this is obviously, and it sounds simplistic, but to me, it was like just obviously, I feel like there's this old, outdated adage of like boys, like people tell their little kids, boys can't get pregnant, only girls can get pregnant. And then I kind of wanted to just like hold up that beautiful magazine cover and be like, wrong, look at this beautiful family and beautiful person. And So yeah, of course I wish it was fully like so positive for you, but I know it was such a gift to others, for you to share that and for them to see potential for their own future and just change the narrative around gender and parenthood and conception and fertility and everything. And you keep doing that too. Oh, and I want to have my talk show moment. I have your book right here. You also wrote a book. So you're also a published author, which we'll put the information about that in the show notes. But that must have, I'm sure that was difficult as well. But I feel like being your own author, you were really able to control the narrative more.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just really lucky that I was approached by a literary agent who I met with, and I felt like she really understood the story and she really wanted to tell it responsibly and keep my voice. I am a writer. I've never thought of myself as an author. I am a writer, mostly of like, essays and, some other pieces like that, prose, things like that. Um, yeah, so that was amazing. And I found an editor that really believed in the story and helped me become the author, the like beginning, middle, and end, and character arcs, and all of those types of things, and structure. I needed help with all of that. And yeah, both Batya, who is my editor, and Mersini, who's my agent, literary agent, were instrumental in making that happen, as well as obviously my partner. I mean, anyone who has ADHD can tell that I have ADHD, and so having to sit down and write for, like probably 68 hours total to get a book through is not easy. So I had to sequester myself off the grid, over a series of months to be able to do that. And, bless his heart, he held it down the whole time with the kids so I could do that. So I'm really, really grateful.
And he was also your co-author for the children's book that you wrote. Is that right? Remembering that correctly?
Yeah, yeah. And that's like a funny story. My very good friend, S. Bear Bergman, who I've known for many, many years, like maybe since I was a teenager, so probably over 20 years. He and his partner own a feminist micro press out of Canada. And yeah, a few years ago, I got a text from Bear that was like, "Hey, can you hop on a call?" And I was like, "Of course, yeah." And we hopped on a call, and he's like, "I bet you know why I'm calling." I was like, "I have no idea why you're calling." And he's like, "Oh, I'm actually hoping that you would be willing to write a book for our next series of, feminist kids books." And I was like, "Oh my God, I had no idea." And yes, of course. And I wrote the text and I spent a ton of time on it. I sent it to him and he was like, "Oh, I hate this." And I was like, "Oh no."
Oh.
And he's like, "Yeah, I need you to start from scratch all
Oh
over again."
no.
And so that night I sat down with my partner Biff and I was like, "Biff, I don't think I could do this. I don't think I could have another kids book in me. I really liked what I did and I don't think I could do what he's asking for." And Biff was like, "Oh, fine, I'll do it." And so Biff actually ended up writing the text for the book. And so really it should just say written by Biff Chaplow. But we decided to be on paper anyway as co-authors, and I helped a lot with the structure and working with the artist and illustrator and things like that. So yeah.
So is the abandoned book ever going to make a comeback?
I don't know. Yeah, there's only so many things that a person can do in a day. You know what I mean? And actually, I co-wrote that original text with my daughter, who's my son's older sister, because that was my idea, was putting it through her lens as the sibling, watching her dad go through a pregnancy process. And what might be exciting, but also kind of scary for a kid like that, using sort of kid appropriate language. So, anyways, it was a little bit more for like a 5 to 7 year old audience because that's what she was at the time. And Bear was like, "No, we're more like a 3 to 5 audience," you know. And I was like, "I don't know how to write for those people."
Those little people.
Yeah.
So, in addition to being an author, can you talk to us about your work in this space, broadly defined, and all the different things that you have done and are doing?
Yeah, I mean, I was a professional storyteller and consultant on inclusion for all the years before having a baby. So I was already partnering with nonprofits, municipal governments, schools, higher ed, and, companies from like startup all the way to Fortune 500 on their inclusion practices. We just wrapped up Pride Month when we're recording this. So lots of like, here's how to use gender inclusive pronouns, and here's the 3 A's of allyship, lots of those pieces. And then after I had my pregnancy experience, I realized how poorly prepared a lot of these extremely thoughtful, compassionate, passionate, educated fertility clinics and centers and OBGYNs. And, there's this whole world of people who do this incredible work who had no idea what to do when I showed up in their offices. And I really take seriously that responsibility of again, I feel comfortable educating my providers that power dynamic is very different for someone whose dad was a doctor. Like I grew up in my dad's medical practice. That was where I went after school every day. So I don't have any kind of fear when I go into those situations, but it's very real to me that most transgender people do not feel that way. And the idea that I can help relieve the burden of education off of them and take it on myself, that's something I take really, really seriously. And it's a real gift to be able to do that. And that's a huge part of what I do now. I travel the world. I present at fertility, like global convenings and conferences and trainings. And then I partner meaningfully with specific agencies to help them understand how to, understand, support, and welcome the transgender community into their work. And we're in the middle of a huge trans baby boom. And there's no data on this that I can see, but I went to the trans family reunion last week in Portland. I could not believe how many under 1 year old babies there were. I mean, it is huge. And we do have a lot of data around the parental intentions of the transgender community. A lot of trans people want to become parents. No matter what's happening federally, no matter what's happening culturally, life finds a way. And trans people are continuing to want to build their families. And they're going to some of these, I get DMs, they go to some of these well-known, reputable clinics and agencies, and they're like, oh no, these people did not know how to support our family. So that's a big part of the work that I do now.
Nice that you're there as that resource for them to be like, hey, heads up, these people need some work.
I
So
mean, I
I
love
can,
doing it.
yeah. And it's got to feel empowering to at least know, like, okay, that did not go well. That interaction was terrible. But you can say, okay, no, no, no. This was terrible, but here's how we can fix it to make it less terrible for us and anybody who comes after us.
That's right. I still have some reproductive endocrinologists who will text me and be like, Trystan, can I hire you for an hour of coaching? Like I had a really bad patient interaction today and I don't know what I did wrong. And so I'm like, yes, of course. We hop on the phone and they walk me through it. I'm like, oh, okay. So there's 3 things I think you did wrong. Let's start with number one, and to really help them walk through any of these missteps. The community continues to evolve and emerge and grow. Language that worked a year ago when I did a training for your practice has continued to shift, and here's new language that people are using and really helping to coach people through to be like, you're not bad, you made a mistake. Let's figure it out. But I'm also trained in the Brene Brown Dare to Lead modalities. And so, she's a social scientist that does a lot of work around vulnerability in leadership and humility in leadership and emotional intelligence. I'm trained on all of those principles. And so I bring that to the work as well. Again, just digging in. I'm a nerd. What do we know about what makes a fantastic medical provider? What do we know about what makes someone a fantastic team leader outside of the fertility and transgender space? I'm doing that work all the time.
That's so great. And you use the word humility, and that's what I was thinking of, is that it takes a certain amount of humility among the providers to acknowledge they need to learn more, acknowledge when they don't get it, right, or when it doesn't work for that particular patient or constellation or family, and to just learn and do better next time. And so it's so evolving, and all of these avenues of understanding and recognition are opening up that even you didn't see or have in your teen years, and certainly the generations before you did not have, that you need to be able to see yourself in a future to even dream about it, not to mention find a safe space and a safe community. So I think you're doing so much for that.
Thank you. Yeah, I forget who I saw speak recently, but they said like, oh yeah, there's this sort of perception that, well, now there's like so many trans youth, or there's too many trans people. And I'm like, compared to what? Like, based on whose standard, you know? We definitely wouldn't, religion is a choice, but we wouldn't say, oh my gosh, all these Christians, like their kids are Christian too. Like, what a
Yeah,
coincidence. Oh, your kids just happen to be Christian. We don't say that. We don't say,
so true.
there's just, I don't know, there's just too many Christians. Like we just accept that, even for things that are a choice, if we have this underlying belief that in fact people can choose what to do with their belief systems and their bodies, then, we might say that, like, even if it was a choice, like, it is an okay thing to choose. Look at this amazing community they get access to. And what we see time and time again is that transgender youth are not born only into families that are accepting. Right, we're seeing all of these families. We see evangelical Pentecostal Christians having kids who are trans. We see people having to move out of Texas and Florida, who were, previously or even currently very, even radically or virulently politically conservative, who tried absolutely everything they could to help their child see all the options available to them that don't involve accepting a trans identity. And then they realize at the end of the day that they may unfortunately be having to choose between a kid who is profoundly unhappy, miserable, and has really bad life outcomes if they make it to adulthood, or the family could shift their beliefs and ideas around what it means to be a good human in the world. And could it also include being transgender, and support their kid to a happy, healthy, productive future? And that's something we see in the data over and over and over again. Every negative outcome in the data that could happen as a result of being trans, we do see trans folks living at or below the poverty level much more than non-trans people. We do see, mental health challenges increasing in our community. We do see suicidality being, bigger. We see all of dropping out of school. The one thing that can happen to shift out those outcomes, one thing, is family acceptance. That's it. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be white. You don't have to be in a, politically progressive town. Like, none of those things will change the trajectory of your life more than a supportive family. So that we really see that's the thing that makes the biggest amount of difference. And you can't support a kid into being trans, but you can certainly guide them towards hating themselves.
Oh my God. Yes. And how is it even a choice? If that, it's like, I can't even imagine not doing the thing that will support and sustain your loved one, regardless of religion or all the different constructs you have. Well, there was a former legislator from Maine who wrote an amazing editorial about his trans daughter, which really helped some legislative action in Maine. And I believe he like wrote it again. And he wrote it again this past session, or shared it again this session. And I found it so helpful because he shared how he struggled with it and how he was conservative. And he kind of was frank about he didn't believe this was real until he experienced it himself and in his own family, and explained his evolution. And so I found it so powerful, and it was effective with some of his colleagues because they were like, "Oh, we know him and we didn't think this was real either, but it sounds like maybe for his family it was." And so I appreciate when people share their stories like that of the growth that they experienced, so that hopefully others can evolve in the same way.
Yes, I mean, a journey story is really profound. That's another thing that I'm like, I have, advanced in many, many years of training on persuasion, on how do we help people reconcile their desire to be inclusive with some of the, cultural programming that they might have been subjected to throughout their whole lives. And a journey story is one of the ways we do that. Is somebody saying, yes, I absolutely started there. And then I came to realize this is not something that anyone is necessarily choosing. This is not something that is bad. This is something where I need to shift my mindset so that I can keep my kid alive and engaged in the family in a healthy way. There is a part of me that obviously wishes that we didn't have so many like failures of moral imagination. It shouldn't have to be your kid that it happens to. And like, here we are. And that is the reality. It is the reality that it feels far away until it isn't. And that is also part of what we were hoping our story would do. I might not be your son. My kids may not be your grandkids. And I hoped that people would see my story and think, Oh, if he was my son, I would be proud. Look at this couple who took in these toddlers who didn't have anywhere else to go and gave them a home. And look at this couple who wanted to build their family more, who wanted to grow their family, and they found a way to do it. And they're doing it with thoughtfulness and intention and care and love, and hopefully sending three humans out into the world to continue to spread that message. That was my hope, that that's what our story would do. And that was really the goal when we decided to tell it.
Well, that's beautiful. And I'm sorry that not everyone has just looked at your family and been like, that is a beautiful, happy family, because that's the only reaction they should be having.
Thank you.
Before we wrap up, is there anything that you wanted to share about that we haven't asked about yet?
I don't think so. People do often ask, like, where can they find me? I'm a little bit on social media, not too much. I'm a little bit on Instagram, so folks can find me there if they would like. I'm much more on LinkedIn, particularly for the professional aspects of things, for my coaching, training, speaking, those kinds of things. And yeah, I think the final thing, again, the other thing I get asked about most commonly is like, what can we do? How can we help? And I think particularly in this moment, the idea of figuring out where is your sphere of influence and really doubling down there. You may not be a federal legislator who's able to act on some of this really, really heinous anti-trans stuff that's happening, but you might be a school leader, and you might be able to, even just as a parent, and I mean just, but you don't have to be the head of the PTA. You don't have to be on staff. Anybody can go to a school administrator and say, hey, what are we doing to support trans youth in our schools? What are we doing to support trans families? Has someone looked at all the permission slips for field trips and made sure that they don't say mother and father on them? Like, you don't have to be anyone special to do that. And you can have a huge impact all on the lives of an entire school community by doing that one thing. Anyone who's an employee of any organization, you can go to HR and say, hey, by the way, is our family leave policy gender inclusive? Can anyone of any gender take parental leave or pregnancy leave or adoption leave? You don't have to be anyone special to do that. And I've seen huge change happen by someone who's the front desk person who answers the phone, going to HR and saying, hey, how come we've never had a transgender inclusion training here? Why are we waiting for the first non-binary employee for us to mess it up? Why wouldn't we do something proactively? You don't need to be anyone special to do that. Anyone can do that work. And that's, I think, really what's needed now is for people, and wherever you have some measure of power and control, really showing up for us makes a huge difference.
I love that. And I think that makes you pretty damn special if you do take that step, however you're able to.
Absolutely.
And we'll be sure to put all of your links in the show notes.
Yeah, that would be great.
Wonderful. So thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been really lovely getting to learn more about you and your work. Before we wrap up, there are two questions that we like to ask all of our guests. We'd love to get your thoughts on these. The first is, what is one thing that you would say to someone who is just starting to grow their family? And on the flip side is, what is one thing you wish people would never say when someone tells them that they are going to embark on this whole journey?
The first one's easy because I say this on every panel they put me on is, if you want to become a parent, hold tightly to your dream and vision of becoming a parent, and hold lightly to how you get there. Bodies are complicated and mysterious and natural, and nature does not give a crap about any of us. And there will never be a time when you end up looking at your kid and thinking, I wish we'd adopted that other kid, or I wish we'd chosen that other sperm donor. Like, there's just never a time you're going to look at your kid and wish they were any different, or that you had gone on the journey in any different way than you had. And I think that's where I see a lot of people struggling, is when they've held too tightly to, well, I'm going to carry and my partner's not going to carry, or we're going to use my best friend from college as the donor. And when it doesn't work out, there's so much heartbreak. And so if you can just hold lightly to how it happens, but hold tightly to the destination, it just ends up unfolding a little more effortlessly. And the thing that I wish people would not say ever is any sentence that starts with, why don't you just blink? Because if you're going through a biological process, why don't you just adopt? I have adopted. There's no just about that. Or people, flip side, I'm going through an adoption. Well, why don't you just make a baby? Whatever comes after, why don't you just, is going to be effed up. I promise you, they've thought of it. They've thought of it. So please don't say that.
Those are both perfect answers.
Yeah, I love them. And I love that your language around what you wish people would say is such a lovely alternative and improvement over telling people like don't give up, is because as we all know, like there's so much uncertainty. Not all paths lead to parenthood, but having that openness to maybe a path or a experience that you weren't expecting just helps along the way. I loved the way you expressed that. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for being our guest today and for everything that you do and just for being who you are. We just really, really appreciate you. And it was so nice to be with you for this time.
Thank you so much for having me. And thanks for all the work that you are doing. I know, you know, the trans community doesn't always hear that, like, yes, we passed a bill that includes fertility preservation for trans people. We couldn't talk about it, but we wrote it specially so that it could be used for that
Yeah.
purpose. I know there's a lot of really thoughtful, intentional, strategic work that's happening. And I love sharing those stories with the trans community because, especially now, but throughout time as well, it can feel like we're pretty isolated out here, and that we're used when it's politically or culturally advantageous and then thrown away when it's not, And so I
Mhm.
love telling those stories of like, no, there are people in rooms with closed doors who are advocating on our behalf all the time, like whether we know it or not. So thank you for doing that work.
Oh, our true pleasure.
Thanks, Trystan.
See you later.
We hope you'll join us next time for more family building stories and resources. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts to make sure you never miss an episode. And follow us on social media at AllPathsFB or visit our website, allpathsfb.org, for more information about our work. All Paths Family Building is so grateful to the members of our circle of support who are vital to our ability to provide emotional support, education, and advocacy that is open to anyone struggling to grow their families. Today, we want to thank our rainbow sponsor, Granada Bio. Thank you for joining us for this episode. Please help spread the word so that anyone who is struggling to grow their family can join the conversation. It's an honor to walk with you on your family building journey.